The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hey, right now, just about 6 minutes after the top of the hour, I am Bill Martinez. He's Bill Pascoe, TPP's man in Washington. He's got all the latest scuttlebutt on the beltway. Can you imagine that? And he's able to contain that in his incredible mind. Thank you very much for doing that for us.
It's a pleasure. It was a great Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, it was special, wasn't
it? The special concert on Sunday night on the west face of the Capitol was.
Yes.
I thought that was an especially good one. I've been watching those for decades now. You know, Gary Sinise, the actor, has been hosting that for 20 years.
Right.
And every year it just seems to get better and better and better. And I got to tell you, the Melissa Leo and Noah Wiley and Jonathan Banks, faces and voices that we know, that we've come to know, and we imbue with authority and integrity because of the roles that they've played. Whoever made the choice of having those three read the first-person accounts of what it was like to be in battle. The first one, from a 17-year-old Revolutionary War patriot to the thing that struck me, that still sticks out in my mind, to hear him say that his first job as a soldier was to stack bodies. My goodness, can you imagine the horror?
Yeah.
But all the choices of the first person accounts of people who were there to share with us, people who I haven't faced war. I was of a generation that wasn't required to serve. I was very lucky that way. I was unlucky in some other ways. But for me to hear these first person accounts is especially touching, especially moving, and I thought they did a fantastic job.
Yeah, it was really well done. I had interviewed Joe Montaigne, who's, I think he's participated in something like 25 of the 35.
Yes.
And something happened and he was not there. And so Mary, I can't remember Mary's last name.
Right,
Mary McCormick. Yeah. Right, I should know that. But anyway, she filled in brilliantly. And like you, I thought it was just, I love patriotism. For me, it's in our blood. We came, we're a family of service. My dad, World War II, three of his sons, me included, served in the military. And what I say to people, we're all Americans and we all are part of the chain of supply, the supply chain in any kind of war effort or support of the military. But I would say this, that being in the military and raising your right hand and making that promise, that solemn promise to serve the country against enemies, foreign and domestic, it's one of those lasting vows that you take that never expires, Bill. Yep. And I say to everybody, you should try to do it. I mean, it's not compulsory, but in a sense, and of course for you, this is after the fact. But although I got to tell you, I mentioned this earlier. I was talking with Jenny Beth, and I said I was at a wreath laying ceremony this past weekend, and the military people that were there of all branches, we were sitting around talking, and without an exception, every one of us said if we were called back to duty, we would do so in an instant, not even thinking twice.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the esprit de corps, that's the commitment, but it's a connection that we want everybody to have in our country.
Yeah.
And whether it's compulsory or otherwise, you put skin in the game, and all of a sudden, the American flag a holy day like Memorial, I say it's a holy day, like Memorial Day is so significant because we're honoring 1 million Americans who paid the ultimate price for us to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. Not only them, but their families, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. Yep. I come from a military family. My father and my father's father both served. My father's father in World War II, my father in the Korean War, and then in the reserves for 30 years, retiring as a colonel.
Uh,
He's still alive. He's still kicking at 94,
wow.
and I am just so grateful for having had the opportunity to grow up with that
Yes.
ethos. I mean,
Well,
I
do me a favor from a Marine, give him a hug for me, would you please? Just say,
I will do so. I'll see him tomorrow for dinner, as a matter of fact.
oh, good, good. Well, give him a big hug for me and tell him thank you. I just so appreciate his service. And one of the other things, I'd met this colonel at another wreath laying event, and it was interesting. Somebody came up to him and said, thank you for your service. That seems to be the vernacular of the day,
Yep.
which I appreciate. It's very nice. People say that. He had the best answer that I heard. He says, you know what? I did it for you.
Oh.
And I
I,
think, wow, that's
yeah,
exactly it. Because that's
that
what we
really
did.
brings it home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did it for you, and we did it for the next generation. That movie, A Great Awakening, that was just playing in theaters,
Yep.
which is the story of Benjamin Franklin, and and what was happening in terms of the Great Awakening.
Yep.
And there's a scene in the movie where Benjamin Franklin and I'm trying to, Whitfield, yes, Pastor Whitfield, and he's there because he's leading the charge on this. I mean, he visits all the colonies 7 times, during this period of time, and really awaken, the people's mindset and understanding of what they were fighting for their God-given right of freedom, Bill.
Right.
And they said, hey, it's not just for this generation, but it's for others. And there was this scene where they were looking out the window and they were looking at, I think, Benjamin Franklin's, it might have been his grandson. And he said, hey, we have to do this, for them. It's not so much for us. We've lived our lives. What happens, we could get killed. The government could come in and put us out for insurrection or what other means, tyranny. But for freedom's sake and for this great American dream, we're doing it for the next generation. And not only that, but the generations forward, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad. Um, it's hard to put in words. The feelings I had, and I have every year at Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And as I said, I miss the cutoff. I'm a little younger than you are,
Hmm.
so I missed the draft by 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a little story. So I was in college, and November 4, 1979 was the end of my of the first semester of the fall semester of my second year in school, November of 1979. It was on November 4, 1979, that the Iranians took the U.S. embassy in Tehran hostage. We had
Right.
52 American diplomats that were held hostage for 444 days. Now, I was done a college student. I was studying foreign affairs. I was studying U.S. foreign policy, and I knew enough to know, even though I was a student at the time, I knew enough to know this was an act of war.
Oh, yeah.
And I assumed that the United States would be declaring war on Iran, give us our diplomats back, or else face
Right.
the full fury of the United States Armed Forces. And I went to talk to, I called my father, who was in the Air Force Reserves at the time, and I said, "What do you think? Should I go sign up now?" Which is what he had done in the Korean War. He didn't
Right.
wait to be drafted. I thought, they're going to reinstitute the draft. Wouldn't it be better for me if I had my choice rather than letting the government decide where they wanted to put me? Maybe I could make my own choice about which service branch I wanted to go into.
Right.
Obviously, there's a familial tie. My grandfather had been in the Army Air Corps, my father in the Air Force. So I was thinking about going into the Air Force. And he
I'll
said,
tell you what, I'm going to pause it right now because we got to go to a
okay,
quick break. We'll pick it up on the other side. More from Bill after this. Stay with
all
us.
right.
Hey, welcome back. Bill Martinez here, along with Bill Pascoe, TPP's man in Washington. Bill, to pick up the story. Okay, so here you are, Iran. 52 diplomats held hostage, as we know, back in 1979, 444 days. And you're thinking, okay, should I enlist so I can have a bit of control of my destiny as opposed to military telling me what I'm going to do?
Right. And I called Dad and we had a talk and he said, generations got to the point, generations created an environment where we don't have a draft anymore. And that's a good thing because the government shouldn't compel service unless there's an actual dire need for it. And we figured out a way that we can do this with an all volunteer structure. So take advantage of that. He said, my father had he had actually been in college when he chose to enlist in the Korean War. And as a result, it took him about 20 years to finish his college degree. Because once he got
Right.
out of the service, then he got married and he had to work for a living. And so he had to go to school at night. And
Mm.
basically, I didn't have much of a father until I was about 12 years old because he was going to
Wow.
night school. He'd
Right.
come home from work and either study or he would go to class. And he said, take advantage of this. This is one of the reasons that your grandfather and I did what we did. So you don't have to. You can go straight through college now. So he convinced me that it wasn't the right thing to do, that we weren't going to have a draft imposed. And guess what? He was absolutely right. Jimmy Carter had this disastrous response, of course,
Mhm.
which helped shape my outlook on what the government ought to do, what foreign affairs were like, and what the U.S. role in the world was. Turned me into a stark raving conservative. I went out and took time off the following year. I took my fall semester off. That was the fall of 1980, and that became the first campaign that I ever worked for. I got trained and I went to work for the Reagan campaign in 1980.
Wow.
So,
Talk
you know,
about jumping into the deep end of the pool. Lord have mercy. Yeah.
Well, it was baptism by fire. It was a fantastic campaign to be
Yes.
your first campaign, as you might imagine.
Yes.
And it really was. It got me started on a career. I found out that uh, the addiction that I had to politics growing up could actually become a career. And
Right.
and so I've enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful thing. I always look back on Memorial Day and say, there was a fork in the road. I almost took that fork, that side of the fork, but I didn't. So
Mm.
all
Yeah.
I get to do is be thankful and grateful to others like you who have made the sacrifice. I appreciate your
Well,
sacrifice on
yeah.
behalf, Bill.
I do not want to
Service.
stand in any kind of way of those that paid the price and the families that have suffered as a result. Yes, I was proud to serve our nation. There are days when we honor those that have served in the military, whether it's Veterans Day and other times, the 4th of July.
Yeah.
But this day especially is so hallowed. That's why I was so irritated. I got to tell you, Bill, I was irritated with some of them on the left that could not constrain themselves. It's just like, I mean, I don't like to say this. I don't like to say that I want to, emigrate those people that hate America. But it's days like this that, I have to restrain my emotion. When you have Mayor Fry thinking that somehow, George Floyd should have preeminence over our fallen, and he honored George Floyd over our fallen Americans. I just think you got to be kidding me.
It's
And
just wrong.
others on the left that are just, it's like, look at you, you got to have some constraint here. And this is what it's coming down to. I've been saying this recently on the show repeatedly. It's not about Democratic Party. It's not about a Republican Party. It's either you are American or you're anti-American. And it's clear that there is a solid delineation in terms of what's happening in our country today. It may be under the guise of a party affiliation and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, where are we headed, with your rhetoric and with your ideas, if any? Is it to make America better, or clearly there are some people that want to destroy America?
They don't like the America that you and I hold dear.
Yeah.
This is the culmination. What we're witnessing now is the culmination of a struggle that's been going on since the late 60s.
Yes.
We had socialist academics who wanted to create an effort to change the American government in what they believe is a small d, more democratic means. What they mean is they want to use government to take the earnings from one group of people, a disfavored group of people, and use the power of government to shift it and move that money to favored groups of people. They tried it as straight Marxism. They tried to import Marxism from Europe into the United States. It doesn't work here. We don't have a class structure like they do in Europe,
Yeah.
where
Well,
Marxism
the
can
bottom line,
appeal.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere,
Well,
Bill.
it doesn't as a governing structure. That's
Right.
it. History
Yeah.
shows us we've had 75 years of looking at what happens when governments become communists and they take over the means of production. They talk about the commanding heights of the economy and all that. So these academics tried to import that in the United States. They found out it doesn't work because in America we don't have the class structure. We have mobility. In any given year, 20% of the bottom 20% of our economic class moves up, moves out of that class. That
Exactly.
that's not possible in Europe. So in Europe,
Exactly.
Marxism can take hold in a way that it just can't in the United States. So instead, they tried to shift it to a social construct, and that's the critical race theory that we're now dealing with. 50 years later, we're having to fight the academics who say there's two classes of people in the United States, the oppressors and the oppressed. And guess what? If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're
Yeah.
not white, you are oppressed by the whites. And a lot of us are going, what the heck are you talking about? Read the
Right.
Constitution, read the Declaration. There's nothing in there about skin color. We
Right.
we hold these truths to be self-evident that our rights are given to us by our Creator.
Yeah. And all men are
There's nothing
created
there
equal.
about skin color.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, Bill, see, I think we've missed a seminal moment with the latest Supreme Court decision that said you can't, redistrict states because of the color of the skin. Because
Right.
it really, there's really what they said to us is what we've all known and couldn't say anything because if we dare said it, we got canceled and they would come after us if we said there's no such thing as systemic racism. It doesn't exist.
That's right.
Right. And
That's right.
so the Supreme Court confirmed that. And I kept thinking there's going to be a parade somewhere. We're all going to be sticking our head out the window going, good God Almighty, free at last. We're all free at last, regardless of the color of your skin. The dream that Martin Luther King had has now been realized. It's been confirmed by our Supreme Court. And it's like, no, you got the Southern Poverty Law Center
Oh,
creating boogeymen out of whole cloth and all this other stuff that's going on because of this race industrial complex that has been so established. That's why they're freaking out because the means of production, the means of their existence has now been exposed as being a fraud.
that's absolutely right. Look, Chief Justice Roberts said in a court ruling more than 20 years ago, the way to stop racial discrimination, the way to end racial discrimination is to stop discriminating on the basis of race.
Right.
Well, that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? And we finally have a Supreme Court ruling that goes to the heart of the redistricting matter and says, no more. You guys have misunderstood what the Voting Rights Act does. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, right after the Civil Rights Act. At that time, that was a legitimate problem that we had. We had institutional racism all over certain states. We know who they are.
Yeah.
But you know what? That was 60 years ago. We've changed things in the last 60 years. We've
As we
now got
continue to move towards that more perfect union that
That's
was
exactly
stated,
right.
right?
And we've now let's just take one example. Georgia in 2021, the Georgia legislature moved a bill to tighten election integrity. The left went nuts, screaming bloody murder about how Republicans were suppressing the vote. You're suppressing the minority vote. In fact, it turned out in the 2022 elections, the next elections, the first elections after that new law was in effect, Black turnout in Georgia was higher than it had ever been. It was higher than white turnout. So the notion that this was done to suppress voters was it was cockamamie BS is what it was. Forgive me,
Exactly.
but that's
Right.
exactly what it was. And now we're going to see it. We're going to see the same thing all throughout the South, all throughout the states where the Voting Rights Act had been applied, because as Justice Alito pointed out in the ruling, times have changed.
Yeah.
Things have changed. The environment has changed. The laws have changed, and our customs have changed. And we need a legal structure that recognizes that, and that
Exactly.
says, once again, you can't have the Voting Rights Act saying you must. And remember, it's not the law. It was an interpretation of the law. It was a Supreme Court ruling in 1986 that got overturned, not the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act is fine for what it does. The problem is that in 1986 there was a Supreme Court ruling, and ever since that Supreme Court ruling, we've been interpreting the Voting Rights Act to be in conflict with the 14th Amendment. That says you can't deny the equal protection of the law to anybody based on skin color. Well,
Right.
we know what the rule is. Constitution's up here, a law is down here. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land and trumps any law passed by Congress. So if the interpretation of the Voting Rights Act comes into conflict with the Constitution itself, sorry, the
Yeah.
Constitution is going to win, and the Voting Rights Act gets pushed down. That's what's happened here,
Mhm.
and you're absolutely right. We're now going to non-race based redistricting, and we're going to see what that looks like when I think I saw one academic trying to figure out how many districts in this country have been drawn specifically for the purpose of meeting that interpretation of the Voting Rights Act. There's 148 out of 435.
Right.
148 districts in the country are so-called majority minority districts.
Right.
They weren't all drawn for the purpose
Yeah.
of meeting the test of the Voting Rights Act, though. I
Yeah,
mean,
those are those maps, Bill. When you look at them, they look like a snake.
that's right.
There's like a snake
That's right.
district. It's all kind of goofy, twisted.
That's exactly right. You look at the second district of Louisiana, the one that was struck down in this Supreme Court case. It's a remarkable district. It stretches from Baton Rouge all the way up to Shreveport, 250 miles long. It's long and thin. Uh,
Yes.
but you've got of the 148 majority minority districts, about 70 of them were drawn expressly for the purpose of meeting
Yes.
the Voting Rights Act. I mean, if you go into New York City or Chicago or Atlanta or Philadelphia, guess what? You don't have to try hard to create a majority minority district. That's where your minority voters are found, in the major urban areas of the country.
Exactly.
Okay, so you don't have to draw majority minority districts there. But outside those districts, when Democrats are in control of the redistricting process, they like to draw those majority minority districts. And unfortunately, for the last 40 years, going back to 1986, Republicans have felt pressure to draw the same kind of district so that they don't get sued. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so
Right.
now we've taken care of that. We don't have to worry about that. Now we can just draw districts the way they were meant to be drawn, where we don't
Yeah.
look at skin color.
Exactly. And where the people will be properly represented, Bill, where, you've got Republicans representing in some of these states 38 to 42, 43%. They have no representation in Congress or
Yeah,
the Senate whatsoever. I
yeah,
mean, that's absurd.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Anyway,
Massachusetts, absurd to suggest that the 40% of Republicans who make Republicans make up 40% of the electorate in Massachusetts. Not a single member of the congressional delegation from Massachusetts
and
is a
somehow that's
Republican.
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
in Illinois is one of my favorite examples. Illinois, where the partisan breakdown of the electorate is 53 to 47. If you look at actual votes cast for candidates for the House, 53 to 47 yielded a map of the 17 congressional districts. 14 of them went to Democrats, 3 to Republicans.
Yeah.
So a 53% vote for the Democrats statewide yields 82% of the congressional districts. That's a
Yeah.
pretty good gerrymander. That's
You
a
see,
really good gerrymander, I got to say.
yeah, they wanted to out gerrymander California,
They
and I
they
think they
tried.
did. They
They
were, I think they
they
did.
tried. But you
Yeah.
know what was going to be the best of all, other than Massachusetts? I mean, let's face it, Massachusetts went 9-0. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
Yeah. Right.
Um, but the one that was going to come close to Massachusetts was the new Virginia map,
Yeah.
where they
Oh, yeah.
where they took a 54 to 46 state and turned that into a 91 to 9 state. 10 to 1 was the way they wanted that new map to go. Uh,
Until their state Supreme Court said, I don't think so.
that's right. That's right. They were
Yeah.
so excited about it, they forgot to pay attention to the rules, and they violated the rules.
Yeah.
And now they got to start over again. I'm confident that Virginia Democrats, having been smashed over the head by the state Supreme Court, they learned their lesson. Um, Presumably they'll do it the right way next time, and it might be interesting to see, do they get it past the voter referendum next time?
Right.
Because this was a much closer thing than a lot of people thought it was going to be.
Well, look how much money they spent, Bill.
I was just going to say, Hakeem Jeffries himself, his super PAC put more than $60 million into that referendum. How does he go to donors now?
Right.
Because he's got 5.5 months left before the elections. He's still got to raise money for that super PAC. He's got to raise another couple $100 million. How does he go to donors who say, "Wait a minute, you took 60 million of our dollars and you basically lit it on fire," is what you did.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
absolutely
On the
wasted.
heels of over $1 billion for Kamala Harris
Oh yeah.
and what, over $1 billion for Hillary Clinton?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Oh
these guys are just taking donor money and flushing it, Bill.
yeah. Candidates matter. This is the lesson.
Yeah.
Candidates matter. Campaigns matter. We say it when you get to the fundamentals. Elections are about choices, and campaigns are about contrasts. And
Yeah.
and the campaign that drives the better contrast is the campaign that wins. And unfortunately for the Democrats, they've put up in recent presidential years, they've put up candidates that can't draw the right contrast. It's too easy to contrast against the candidates they've been putting up. They're just not very good candidates. And
Exactly.
as I look at, the amazing thing that you and I talk sometimes about our frustrations with the Republican Party and how they don't. It doesn't seem that the Republicans always want to support President Trump. President Trump is breaking ground. Listen, this is the bull who carries his own china shop with him. We all knew that. That's why he got elected. That's a
Yes.
feature, not a bug, of the
Yeah.
Trump administration and the Trump presidency, right?
Right.
Some Republicans, you and I talk about it sometimes. Some Republicans don't seem to get that,
Yeah.
and we're frustrated. And we see the president in the polling. We see his numbers go down in the polling, and we get a little frustrated. And I'm frustrated until I look at the Democrats and their image in the polling. And my God, they're running 20 points behind the Republicans. It's a year and a half after that disastrous election for them, and they still haven't figured out what to do. Last week, we haven't talked about it, but last week they finally released the autopsy report,
I
the
know.
so-called
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
autopsy.
Right. Exactly.
Oh my goodness. If you want some comedy reading, sit
Yeah.
down with that and a good glass of scotch and maybe a cigar and
Yes.
entertain yourself for a couple hours. You're thinking, you know what? You know how much money they paid the guy who put that together? Zero. And I think they got their money's worth. Uh,
Right.
because that's about what that piece of trash was worth. I can't believe they actually called that an autopsy report. I understand now why Ken Martin, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, didn't want to release it. When they
Mhm.
handed it to him, he looked at this and said, "Are you kidding me? I can't
Yeah.
put this out. This is the definition of not ready for prime time. There's
Right.
typos, there's misspellings, there's missing chapters, there's a conclusion, insert conclusion here. There's a blank page. Well, how do you call this an autopsy report?
This is
It's
probably the same script writer for Biden, right? With the directions in there that he would read the direction and go, insert conclusion here, and they're going, oh, you're not supposed to say that. Yeah, it's amazing, Bill, that this is again something you and I talked about this before. I had predicted that the Democratic Party was going to be lost in the desert going back to 2020. Had they not cheated, had Biden not got elected, that was their Waterloo. They should have realized the collapse of the Democratic Party then, but they didn't, sadly, and it ended up costing the American people trillions of dollars.
yeah,
How much more fraud were they able to execute? Political payoffs. Because the thing was, is to me, the motivation of Biden and the Democrats to spend so much money so quickly in taking advantage of COVID is because they had a lot of political debts to pay off because of the Hillary campaign.
yeah, yeah. That's true. And boy, did they?
And
How
it's
do you say?
disgusting.
I
We're,
want to be.
as taxpayers, Bill, what so disgusts me about it is we're the ones paying for that,
That's
not
right.
them.
That's right. I always try to be as generous and charitable as I can when I don't know somebody's motives. I want to fall down on the side of being generous and not assuming the worst.
Right.
Uh, but the fact of the matter is, the Government Accountability Office, the government itself, the GAO, put out a study a year and a half ago where they said by their own estimates, we as American taxpayers lose between 233 and $521 billion every year to fraud.
Yeah.
500 billion. Let's say it's somewhere in between. Let's say it's 348 billion. That's in between 233 and 521. 348 billion. You know what that means? That means every single person in the United States, there's 348 million of us. That means every single person in the United States lost $1,000 to fraud last year.
Mm.
Last
Yeah.
year. It's not once, it's every year we lose
Right.
$1,000.
Right.
Given that the average taxpayer's bill is about $13,000 a year, uh, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
$1,000 of that is lost to fraud. Can we
Yeah.
do something about that, please?
Yeah.
Jenny Beth on her regular podcast, she had an investigative journalist, Walter Kurt, on late last week. They were
Mhm.
talking about Medicaid fraud. Excuse me,
Right.
not Medicare, Medicaid fraud. Um, he's looking at the Doge statistics, the data sets that came out of the Doge work that Elon Musk headed up a year ago, and he found something just extraordinary. He just picked one state, Michigan, and he went in and he looked at 229 million rows of data. And he's got 600 home health care businesses that are billing the state for Medicaid services. He found just by running the numbers, just by doing, a couple afternoons worth of work, he found 21 businesses that are no longer listed as living entities. That is, the business has been shut down as far as the state is concerned. And yet
Right.
they're still billing the state for $118 million in Medicaid services for home health care. The business doesn't exist. There's no service being offered, but they're taking in 118 million. And you know what? This is the scary part. The prosecutors say we don't have the time or the resources to go after a fraudster if the fraud is less than $1.5 million. Well, let's all remember that. You can steal
Yeah.
$1.49 million from the government and get away with it because they don't have the resources to prosecute you.
Well,
That's
that's why in San Francisco, with the same kind of thinking, you can steal up to $1,000. You can go smash and grab at a department store,
that's
and
right.
nothing's going to happen because
That's right.
they don't have the fire. You see, again, that reminds us that our government is too big. Because if
Yeah.
we can't handle things like this and control law and order, and this is, this is just one aspect, Bill. We're $39 trillion in debt and growing. And, and I posed this question to several economists. I said, how much of that $39 trillion can you attribute to vote getting? He goes, every bit of it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, think about it.
That's exactly what he said
We're
for.
not in debt because, there was something, this is what we love about Trump. Again, contrast, like you're talking about. Trump does something and he talks about a return on investment. We're going to do this, but we're going to get this back. When have
Right.
you heard that from any Democrat president?
It's it's not in their lexicon. They don't understand it. Look, we
Right.
we something else we talked about. If you're a smart young guy, you're coming out of college. If you lean left, you think that government is a positive, that government is a good thing, and you might want to actually go into government. And if you go into government when you're a young person and you make that your career, you never test the marketplace. You never understand the challenges of going the other way, going into the
Right.
private sector, where every day you could lose your job if your boss decides that paying you isn't returning enough on his investment in you, right? You've
Right.
got you've got to be worth more to the business than it costs the business to keep you employed there, or you're going to be separated from that job very quickly. In the private
Exactly.
sector, that's the way it works. So you meet the challenges. When people in the private sector who have had a career in the private sector decide at some point, you know what, it's time for public service. and they go into public service, they have a totally different view of how things work, how the world works.
Exactly.
And I think that leads to the inevitable conflict. That's the explanation for the conflict between Republicans and Democrats. We don't have, the very first campaign that I worked in that 1980 campaign that we talked about earlier, I ended up leaving the Reagan campaign and working on a congressional campaign. Phil Crane's little brother, David, was running for Congress. This was a guy, he was one of the smartest guys I ever met. He was a doctor of medicine and a doctor of law. And he sat on the faculty at the Indiana University School of Medicine and the Indiana University School of Law. He had been in the private sector his entire life as a practicing psychiatrist.
Right.
He was running against a congressman whose highest job before he became a congressman 6 years earlier was he was a high school civics teacher. Now, I'm not trying to besmirch high school civics teachers. I think they're very important in my life. My high school civics teacher was the guy who got me interested in government to begin with. So I've got a soft spot for high school civics teachers. But on the other hand, he hadn't worked in the marketplace. He had been an employee. He had always gotten a government check from his very first job. And so in the very first campaign that I worked, I got to see how the conflict worked out. And it was amazing to hear the two guys debate their different ideas. That a version of that debate has been going on for the last, I don't know, 150 years.
Yes, at least.
Certainly for 100 years, since the progressive era, since Woodrow Wilson came to power and began to grow the size of government to the point where we see it now. Stop and think about it for a second. Before Woodrow Wilson became president and we got the 16th Amendment that allowed for an income tax, think about this. The government was funded by excise taxes and tariffs.
Exactly. And tariffs, exactly.
Now, we all talk about, wouldn't it be great to go back to a time when we didn't have to have an income tax? Yeah, but keep in mind that means you're going to really have to shrink government. The only way that we could have a government that could survive on excise taxes and tariffs is if we cut about 2/3 of government. Now, I'm all for that, but to cut 2/3 of government means you're not trimming around the edges.
Yeah. Well, it's like eating an elephant one piece at a time. You don't have to do it overnight. I mean, look what Trump has done in cutting back. All these jobs that we're getting now, Bill. These are all private jobs, our increased jobs that we're hearing about every month. And I think we've reduced, we're getting to the point where it's almost 500,000.
That's right.
Public jobs
have been separated. Right. That's right. That's right. And that's great. And that's, it's kind of interesting when we get the jobs report every month. I see, the private sector created 200,000 new jobs. Oh, wait, government lost 50,000 jobs. So the entire job growth is only 150,000. And I think, well, it could be higher. That number could be higher if we weren't firing government workers on a regular basis, if we weren't finding ways to do without them. So that's one of those deals where, he'll never have the job creation numbers that some other presidents before him may have had, because the entire time he's sitting there with a meat cleaver cutting the size of the federal government.
Exactly.
And we need to point that out. We need to remind people of that.
Right. Yeah. It's as you said, it's all about contrast, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, the good thing about contrast is that you have to be Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles not to see it.
That's right.
Just saying. No, no disparagement whatsoever. It's just that but again, you can be so ideologically fixed, as Jordan Peterson says, that you render yourself stupid. I say also that what happens, especially with socialists and Marxists, they get so siloed, they're not listening to anybody else. And it's like, as a result, they've dumbed themselves down by choice, Bill. Yeah. Because they're not hearing any outside opinion. They just think they know it all, like where the Democrat Party is right now. And they're not going to be healed until they find a way out of the silos that they have, they've incarcerated themselves in.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
But such as it is. I better let you go. Hey, thanks again for the time. I appreciate it. Bill Pascoe, TPP's man in Washington. Thank you, Bill. Take care.
Good to be with you, Bill.
Man, we covered a lot of stuff here. That's awesome.